committee hearing discussion. This discussion is being hosted by the Darlene McDonald for Congress campaign. We are going to begin by asking the panelists to introduce themselves as well as talk about which form of media they use to watch the live discussion, the hearing event. This discussion is going to be almost like a two-parter. Simultaneously, we're going to both discuss our feelings and what we learned and what we saw, as well as if we feel that the media that we used to watch it had any spin or effect or impact on what was shown. If we would like to know if different channels displayed the media differently, if things were left out or cropped. Those are things that we are going to discuss tonight. So I am going to begin by giving Darlene the floor to introduce herself and which news media outlet she was assigned to watch through.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm Darlene McDonald, and I was assigned to just watch it straight stream from the House committee, and just without any other additional media at all. And so for me, it was a different way for me to watch it. I usually watch one of the networks televised channels like MSNBC or CNN. So for me, it was just straight streaming. There was no bias at all because there were no commentators at all. So I am Darlene McDonald. I am running for Congressional District 4 for Congress. And let me explain also why I wanted to do this. How we perceive what happened on January 6th is oftentimes influenced by the media and how we receive our news. So I wanted us to come together and be assigned to watch different news media, different news outlets, so that we can discuss what we heard and hopefully be able to come together and have a discussion about it based on how that was presented to us. So for me, it was just straight streaming. There was no bias at all because there was no commentaries.
Thank you, perfect, Darlene. We will go next to Michael McDonald.
I'm Michael McDonald. I'm Darlene's husband. My background is in computer science and corporate America. I was assigned to watch Fox Business News, and I'm sure we'll get more deeply into that discussion, but yeah, it was kind of interesting, their take. There was for the most part just during the breaks is when they spoke. They didn't interrupt anything, and I'm excited to talk about a little bit of their spin on things.
Thank you, Michael. We'll go next to Ryan Jensen.
Hi, thank you for having me. Darlene, thank you for having us here for this discussion, and thank you for stepping up and running. Really appreciate it as a member of CD4. So I was assigned to MSNBC, and it was an interesting angle that they chose. I was able to tune in just for about a half hour before it started, just to kind of see what they were thinking and how they were going to set the stage. And they kind of geared it towards police, which we can kind of get into a little more obviously with the police testimony and some of the things, and then some of the ways they tied it in, and some of the analogies were quite interesting on their messaging as far as afterwards what they felt like needed to be exposed, if you would. But my name's Ryan Jensen, again a member of CD4, chair the Utah Healthcare Caucus, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ryan. If we could go next to Diana.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Diana, and I am founder of Azteca Creative Media. I am thankful to be part of this panel and be able to share my perspective. I was assigned Telemundo, so my goal was to be able to watch something in Spanish, and Telemundo was the only news that was streaming it in Spanish. So thank you for giving me this opportunity and to join you tonight.
Perfect. Thank you, Diana. Emily, can you join us next?
Hi, I'm Emily Olsen, and I was assigned to cover CNN. And it's not, I do watch CNN on some days of the week. I'm an avid news watcher. So I kind of knew what to expect with CNN. So I guess I'm excited to share some of my insights on that.
Perfect. And last panelist on our list here is Kenny. Do you mind introducing yourself and which media you use to watch the discussions?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Ken Akers. I'm a local activist here in Salt Lake City, Utah, and pretty heavily involved with certain issues that are going on, you know, and with the equality. And thank you, Darlene, for setting the tone here and allow us to speak about this incident that has happened and giving us the opportunity to speak. The channel that I was required to watch was PBS. It's pretty straightforward. Some details in regards to, I mean, live streaming now is a little bit different nowadays on computers and stuff. So there were some requirements on PBS to kind of get towards that information, getting it downloaded on the TV and getting access and whatnot. But other than that, I felt the commentary and the information was pretty straightforward. And it's day one. I mean, it's going to be an interesting take, and I'm looking forward to more information. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, panelists, for introducing yourself and telling us what media platform you use to watch the hearing. I do want to say that we will have some time at the end for any questions or comments for anyone who's not a panelist. So let's get to it. I think something that is really interesting to me is a question towards Michael. Michael, why were you watching on Fox Business?
Because Darlene told me to.
Okay, was Fox News itself?
Fox News did not broadcast it, actually. So we wanted to get a Fox related news source.
Okay, yeah, I think that is really interesting, especially considering that this discussion, we want to understand how people are perceiving the media and the data that they're intaking, where Fox News is one of the top two, right, media sources in the United States that they would choose not to show such a historic event. Does anyone have any commentary on that?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Michael, for taking that on. But the reason why I wanted to include Fox News in that, and it unfortunately Fox News itself didn't cover it. They chose to put it on Fox Business, is because Fox News is the most watched cable news network. So if people are not getting that information, or the people who watch Fox News on a regular basis is not hearing or not seeing in this hearing, it matters. It matters in how we're going to have the conversation about these hearings. And this is our generation's Watergate moment, if you will. And let's face it, not everyone got it right with Watergate. There were people who went down with the ship. And we know now what happened with the Nixon, the President Richard Nixon White House and the Watergate tapes. There's a lot of information out there, some fabulous podcasts, actually, Slow Burn being one of them, that you could watch to get more information on the Watergate hearing. But this is our time and our moment to do what is right, not based on our party affiliation, but what is right for the country in our way forward as Americans, not as Republican, not as Democrat, not as independent, not as unaffiliated, but as Americans. And that was the reason why I asked Michael to watch Fox News, because it is the most watched cable news network that we have.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned Watergate because Woodward and Bernstein were both commenting on the CNN's live streaming of it. Emily, do you have anything to add to that? Maybe their comments?
I'm sorry, was that directed at me?
Emily.
Emily, sorry.
Yeah, they did. They had Woodward and Bernstein on the set. I think they were right there in the Capitol for the last 15 minutes before the hearing started. And so they really were able to, you know, I'm sure they had some planned remarks, but they were also able to give a lot of just, you know, just an incredible perspective of you know, I also, in fact, that's something that CNN talked about, you know, as they introduced Woodward and Bernstein, was how similar it is, this hearing is to the Watergate hearing. Of course, we said that at the first Trump impeachment, and I have to say that the first Trump impeachment, I think, more disheveled. I was more upset. It really upset me on a daily basis. Where this one, I feel like either it will or it won't. I'm trying to set up my emotions to expect whatever happens. They may come up with just a beautiful presentation that is flawless, but that may not be enough to convince enough Americans that what happened was bad. So,
if you don't mind me adding, just in reference to Watergate, MSNBC, they said something that kind of struck out to me. I wasn't old enough really to, you know, be around for the hearing or to, you know, listen, intertwined and really understand the hearings of Watergate, unfortunately. But they mentioned that, you know, they played the clip of Ivanka Trump when she confirmed Attorney General Barr's claims that it was BS and that the election was not stolen. And they just kind of made the parallel that, could you imagine if in the Watergate days, you know, if that would have happened to the president's daughter at that time, and she would have said that, you know, the claims that he is out spitting is BS. And so that kind of struck out to me pretty hard with MSNBC, and they kind of followed everyone else's lead and let them play out as well and didn't interject.
Yeah, I think on the Fox, if I could jump in there just and follow up on the Ivanka business, it seemed to me that, well, if the panel there's 3 people and it was moderated by Martha McCallum and Brett Baer, and Martha McCallum seemed to sort of paint things as nothing's happening here, but then like we haven't heard anything new and there's nothing surprising here at all, and yet the panel and her co-moderator specifically talked about Ivanka, and the panel seemed to be quite impressed, like, wow, I can't believe that Ivanka said this. But then Brett Baer kind of pivoted back and said, yeah, I wasn't really impressed with her performance. In fact, he said, quote, Ivanka's performance was less than stellar. And I didn't quite get what he was driving at there, if he was basically saying she was lying or what point he was trying to make there. But he characterized that as a performance. I found it surprising that she said straight up, yeah, it's Bill Barr, blah, blah, blah. And she was not surprised by that, and Brett Baer was not impressed by it, but the rest of the panelists were kind of impressed by that, which was interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. There were a lot of unseen videos, never before seen videos that they presented. I kind of want to circle back to the beginning of what we saw, particularly with Representative Benny Thompson's statements, opening statements, where he basically flat out said this was an attempted coup that was failed. Does anyone have any comments, Diana or Kenny, on I feel was a very strong opening statement where he truly was making the point that this was intentional and not a mistake?
Yeah,
There you go.
I mean, I think what we're tiptoeing around right now is obviously, I mean, to some of us is blatant facts. You know, I have a extreme military background, 20 years retired military, and you know, you have to look at some of these things with the attempt, as you know, what was mentioned before. Um, a lot of the terminology, the verbiage, you know, a lot of the things were being mentioned and broadcasted, and unfortunately, when it comes to you know, anti-terrorism and security measures, we have to be careful what we're broadcasting out to the public. So finding proof of that to be able to connect, you know, if that message is being relayed publicly and people are responding to that, that's going to be the tricky part here. So that word, you know, to me, how would I word this? Saying that it was an attempt or if it was deliberate is going to be the trick here, because it's going to, you know, there's going to be a very strong dance with that. But I mean, there's right now we're just going to have to connect the dots and try to get those things together. But more so, it was definitely a strong approach to this whole matter. Absolutely.
So let me give you my experience. The Telemundo, there was no commentary. It was just translated into Spanish. So I experienced it all by myself, but I really wanted to have some form of engagement. So I reached out to a dear friend of mine that is very, how do I say it? She's very like pro everything that they did, right? And I just really wanted to engage with her. Like, what is her point of view? Like, why does she feel like this? And every time I would ask her questions, she would always come back with me with an answer. She was like, well, Trump never actually told them to go inside. And I had to explain to her, he incited it. Like, there was actual messages that called them to go in and fight. And so I was kind of like dumbfounded. I'm like, you're listening to the evidence, like you're listening to everything being presented, but you're still able to twist it and say, well, they actually didn't do this. So I'm really interested to see on the next hearings, the more of the evidence, and people just cannot question it anymore. Like there's no questioning when there's facts presented on the table. So looking forward to it.
If I may, so I watched a couple of things before the hearing started. I watched the rebuttal, the Republican rebuttal that aired prior to the hearing, and how the conversation was going to be coached to conservatives and Republicans and pro-Trump supporters, so that to prepare them for what they were going to see. So I watched that, and then I watched just a little bit of MSNBC prior to it, and then I turned the television off. But before I turned the television off, I heard Michael Steele, who is the former chairman of the RNC. And what he said was, there are going to be people just like your friend who are going to see what's before their eyes. And the quote that he used was, "Don't believe your lying eyes," something like that. And then he said, in that case, you can't reach them. And because they're seeing it with their own eyes and they still refuse to believe it. It's sort of like the movie Don't Look Up. It's right there. All you have to do is look at it. It's right there. And I don't know how else really to explain that to people who refuse to look up. And because the evidence is there. Do we give up on them? I don't know. But I, like with you, Deanna, mine was no commentary at all. At the 10-minute break, it was silence. I went and got some water and came back to my computer. It was me having to sit alone with my thoughts, and it was chilling for me. I was shaken. I was shaken. I made the mistake of looking on Twitter, and there was a comment made by one state senator that actually kind of upset me. Because as a Democrat, I'm not happy about this. I'm not happy about what happened to my country on January 6th. I don't hate America. I'm actually almost in tears about it, because not only just about what happened to our country, but what happened to the people, what happened to those law enforcement officers. If you could look at what happened to those law enforcement officers and think that we Democrats are cheering because we don't like Donald Trump. I'm not very fond of Donald Trump, but I'm not cheering about what happened to my country on January 6th. I'm not cheering about police officers being beaten with flags and this officer getting a concussion. I'm not happy about that. I'm not celebrating that. This is serious. So I really hope that as Americans, we take this seriously, so that as a country, we can come together as a country and as people. That's my hope, really.
Well, I think I just jump in there and say that then answering the question you asked is that, I think we have to reach out to these individuals who have a difficult time believing their own eyes. There's some subtlety to what happened on this Fox Business News, but I think the tone of the committee itself was that why are Americans so divided when we're very much Americans first, right? And should think that way. So I think to answer your question, I would say yes, it's very much worth reaching out to them and trying to do in whatever way we can to help us come together and have some kind of common view of reality. But to your point, there is some subtle things, if I may, thank you, that they used that there was not unexpected coming from Fox, but they were pretty subtle about it. They seemed very, there was some temerity, and I mean, they seemed like a little bit fearful to directly say that this didn't happen. It was really interesting to watch the moderators and just the very different views that everybody had as they watched this. As one person saying nothing really happened. When I guess probably the opposition person, Jessica Turloff, I believe she didn't get much time to speak, but when she was introduced, Martha McCallum said, well, all the members of this committee were picked by Nancy Pelosi. Go ahead. And that kind of thing is, it's a phrase that is designed to wind up people of, certain kinds of viewers.
I definitely think some of that conversation is what you would hear depending on which news station you're listening to. Mm-hmm. I was listening to the CNN broadcast, and I believe they said it in the hearing that the Republicans refused an independent investigation, and therefore that is why there was a committee. I also want to bring up, we were talking about Representative Benny Thompson, but Liz Cheney was also the other person who was speaking. And to someone to say, oh, this was all Nancy Pelosi, it's all the Democrats, to negate Liz Cheney and her legacy and her family's legacy and what they have meant to the Republican Party in our lifetimes seems ignorant on purpose. You are ignoring who this person is and her legacy and what has happened. Definitely a stronghold Republican, always has been. And to see her being so strong and forthcoming in her opening statements was also very chilling for me as someone who typically would not be on the same side as Liz Cheney in a lot of issues. I want to jump a little bit to Bill Barr's testimony, where he stated he had 3 different discussions with Donald Trump, and he stated that this was his views on him winning were bullshit, were his statements. That was an never before seen video. I just want to see or listen to how your particular media stations talked about that or interpreted that, because I thought that was very interesting, especially considering that in his tenure as Attorney General, he was pretty much on Trump's side in almost everything that Trump did during his presidency for that time period. Emily or Ryan, does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Sure, I'll go ahead. I think MSNBC did a pretty good job after, of course, the hearing. I mean, they didn't interject, but they were pretty fearless, and it kind of circles back into what Ken said. You know, with his experience in military and such, they fearlessly said it was this is a national security issue. And also in a different way as well. They said this shows the clear vulnerability that we have, or the issues that we have with a peaceful transfer of power and the process. If a few more people went along with this plan, we might have, you know, obviously not President Biden, but we might have a different regime and a different style of government. So they were very clear on, you know, national security issue, which I believe ties into the Attorney General, and why he felt very clearly, strongly after however many times, right? So I think that was an issue. I think also another highlight issue that MSNBC did a good job of relaying was the Jeff Clark issue, the acting deputy AG, how they sent 5 letters out to 5 different states about needing to put up a different slate of electors or whatnot. So anyway, I think, you know, it's a huge national security issue. It makes you question a little bit, are we going to have a free and fair election? Are these people going to create so much chaos? Are we so split as America that are we really going to have an election, a fair election coming up? I mean, it's alarming.
Well, yeah, also, I mean, if you don't mind me piggybacking on that a little bit with the national security, I mean, it almost seems at the point to me of watching this and of course experiencing this whole event unfold at the Capitol 11 months ago, it's persuasive nature, if you would, because a lot of these things we're watching a lot of professional people that were involved. This isn't just face value of the people that breached the Capitol. There's a lot more people behind the scenes, and this is a huge security issue. You know, like Darlene said earlier, it's unfortunate what had happened to the police officers and the state employees and professionals that were working the grounds that day. And I too feel the empathy and sympathy for the people that were down there too on the ground. But this is the rate of penetration is a lot deeper than the individuals that we're seeing face value. And that's where, you know, the security breach for me becomes extensively important for us to pay attention to. And I, you know, can't stress this enough, the facade or the fake imagery that we're going to see based on these news media outlets. We need to make sure that we peel all of that back as well.
And if I can just hurry and add shortly to that, you know, MSNBC did also do a good job of tying in the police officer, the Capitol police officer, Edwards, the young lady, her testimony about hand-to-hand combat, war zones. They tied that in kind of as, you know, just tied it into how it was Trump. And, you know, he was the president. He could have called, he didn't call any government official, not one government official. And I think it was Cheney or Thompson, I can't remember who made that clear, but didn't call the defense secretary, didn't call the, you know, National Guard, didn't call anybody, nobody in the government. And so anyway, I thought they made that very clear as well. And that was pretty interesting.
Yeah,
that's a good add.
I just want to make the comment that Mark Milley, the United States Chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff, an Army general, stated that Mike Pence made the calls. Mike Pence called the Army and basically said, we need to do something. We need everyone to calm this situation down. And that phone call was followed by Mark Meadows saying, don't do anything. We don't want it to look like Pence is the one calling the shots and not Donald Trump. I thought that was crazy. Go ahead, Darlene.
Yeah, yes, I think we also have to keep in mind the order of which these things are allowed to happen, or at least supposed to happen. And that was one of the things that in the pre-buttal that I heard with Kevin McCarthy and the leadership, the Republican House leadership, apparently there's a narrative that Nancy Pelosi could call the National Guard. That's false. If only the president can call the National Guard, and theoretically, Mike Pence didn't have the authority to call out the National Guard. It is only the president of the United States. And usually when the National Guard is called out, especially under cases like this, my history lesson teaches me that the National Guard has been called out by the president to squash civil rights cases and anti-civil rights situations when it was called out against the George Wallace in Alabama, what became known as the school door, blocking the school door in Foster Auditorium at the University of Alabama. It was called out during that time. It was called out for the marchers to march across Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was called out for Ruby Bridges to go to school. These were cases when the National Guard was called, these types of cases. So it's never been a case where the vice president of the United States called the National Guard, always the president of the United States.
Thank you for that background, Darlene. Emma, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I had not heard that rumor, or that's fascinating. I'm going to have to go find that pre-buttal. That's really interesting. I think that the only way that the National Guard came in was after Trump's tweet. Once Trump tweeted, "Oh, I love you all," and it's not, he didn't actually have to say it's time to go home now. But basically that's what whatever his tweet was enough of a signal to the military that they could step in. But yeah, I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much by saying that I was, I wrote down some notes about what Carolyn Edwards said, her moment that she could, that, sears in her mind, where she stepped back behind the line and could see the war scene, is how she described it. And, she was literally slipping in people's blood, and she was trained as a police officer, but never thought she would be put in a combat situation. That was literally, it was literally a war zone. So it's just so unfortunate. Like Darlene, I had not heard either that, oh, the Democrats just want us all to have to relive this, and this is like watching a movie for us or something. No, I watched this live. I watched this live when it happened. I was glued to my TV set the whole time. We had no idea what was going to happen. And, I kind of expected there to be some kind of pretty violent protest that day. But when they breached the Capitol, I was just stunned. I couldn't even move. So, but it's sickening to know that the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers had combined forces. They were coordinated. They met in a parking garage the night before and shook hands and blah blah blah. But every step of the way, this was coordinated. And I'm sure we'll learn more about that as we see more hearings. This is just scary. It's overwhelmingly scary. I'm sorry, one more point I wanted to say was in let's see. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I will come back to that. I'm sure there'll be
Yeah,
time.
I just wanted to jump on there because I think Darlene might have stuck a quarter in me on this incident with the civil rights movement and where the National Guard had, come into play with these things. Of course, historically, a lot of my information and background comes from a lot of these incidences, throughout history where the National Guard was involved in a lot of civil rights movements. And let's just face it, this is a particular incident which is on the other side of the coin where nothing actually happened. Once again, historically, we have, monumental amount of events that, there was a lot of stronghold. These things were looked at as terroristic views in a civil matter, in civil rights. And there was fast action by all governmental parties down to the police department and ready aid individuals on the ground. And this incident basically just got put on pause. To me, watching it live, I was extremely dumbfounded like you, where I was completely out of pocket to think, well, where is the authorities here? And going back to, my personal experience in combat and being in the military and stuff, and hearing testimony about, walking in the pool of blood. I don't know what else. I'm just going to be blatant here that I don't know what else is un-American at this point, where we're at the, the Capitol and we're on the ground of the United States where we're doing this and we're acting in this state of nature where, a group of people, Antifa and these, hard right groups that are shaking hands, high-fiving each other, meeting, and conducting their, themselves in a horrible fashion in this country. So I couldn't agree more. I just want to make sure with these things that are unfolding that all these things get addressed, but it seems like an awful lot of work on the other side of the coin.
Oh yeah. Well, and I want to acknowledge, Kenny, I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I just wanted to acknowledge that there is a legitimate racism component to the way that it was handled. That it just is not logical that I mean, is it because they were white that they didn't respond? Or at least that's the way it looks. I will say that it's legit, but also there's
Sure.
so
And
much more. Yeah.
That's why I don't want to point the finger as of yet. I mean, it's easy for me to wave that finger and go into that route. But I mean, statistically, let's just add things up here. I mean, let's not open that door and not look at it, because I mean, it does seem a little persuasive, and I'm going to be extremely respectable when I say this. So, I mean, it's pointing that direction, but I mean, let's look at the rest of the unfold here.
I have something to add to that after Darlene.
I would have to say the part that really got me, and I'm curious as to if Fox Business addressed this at all. I don't think it should be dismissed that there were weapons stored nearby.
Right.
They came prepared for war. They came prepared to take the Capitol, and the fact that they had weapons stored for if you've ever been to DC, you're in close proximity, and most people work in DC and live either in Maryland or Virginia. So you're just a hop, skip, and a jump from these locations, just probably a half an hour away from these locations. So they were within a drive in half an hour probably of getting military gear for war. And I guess they were going to go to war with whomever, whether that was the legislature on the Hill, whether that was the National Guard, whether that was the military. I'm not really sure. Maybe we'll hear that later. Who exactly were they preparing to go to war with? Is my question.
For sure. And I believe that they displayed a video of one of the subpoenas where they asked, did you give weapons out of the weapons that you were storing? And they said they refused to answer that question. They weren't going to answer it. So let's jump to Ryan had a comment, and then I have a question for Dan about the Spanish broadcast.
And I was just going to circle into the Proud Boys a little bit and the Oath Keepers, just briefly about how MSN's take was on it. I mean, they mentioned they did a good job. They set this up as an alley-oop in basketball. Proud Boys, Donald Trump alley-ooped it over to them and they dunked it home. They laid out and told us that on MSNBC anyway, that 800 plus people had criminal charges. The investigative committee interviewed over 1,000 people. They mentioned that 250 to 300 Proud Boys were there that day. They also did not go to the rally to listen to Donald Trump. They went and scouted the Capitol beforehand and met them up there. They needed the crowd behind them, and they went in a chain. And Ken could probably tell us the structure they went in. It was more of a barricade style of some military form of chain, and they had this plan. And MSNBC did a kind of good job of getting the feelers wet to lay that out, and I think that's going to be told in time to come. But I mean, they even also tied in the tweet of Proud Boys stand back and stand by. I mean, it's very clear that these people were meeting. They were talking about being in 1776 homes where they could stay and have angles in homes to have a bird's eye view and things, and to stash guns and ammunition. It was very concerning as a normal citizen. I mean, this isn't normal behavior for normal citizens. So I believe a lot more. Obviously, I mean, it's still to come. You're getting a few glimpses of the parlor videos and chats. So I think you guys are right. Time to tell. We'll tell. But I mean, it's quite clear that there's a heavy presence of oath keepers, Proud Boys. Unfortunately, people that backed the blue, and how that ended that day. So I mean, and I think Officer Edwards' testimony also tied into that. She said they turned the tables, and that's when I knew we were in trouble. So I just think there was definitely more plotted, and they needed the mob, and it was a multiple pronged approach. I mean, it was a military style approach. These guys aren't dumb; they're running the country, for hell's sake. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Yeah, just 2 things on that. They did state that the membership for the Proud Boys multiplied ×3 after Donald Trump used that stand back and stand by statement. So ×3 multiplication of membership, which is incredible. I do want to start moving on to the testimonies from Officer Edwards and Nick Quested, because they were very compelling and very touching. I want to try to understand how in the Spanish Telemundo broadcast, how that was shown. Was it captions underneath, or was it dubbed? Because I feel like that was such a compelling testimony from Officer Edwards that I would be interested to know if there was anything that could have been lost in translation or misconstrued in that language change.
Telemundo, they did a great job. It was dubbed, but you could still faintly hear the English version. So I was comparing the translation, and they did an excellent job in translating it. And another point I wanted to share about Telemundo is that I was able to stream it for free on the app. So I have no cable. I was able to stream it, so it's accessible for all Spanish speakers to go in and listen to the following hearings. And one more thing about Telemundo, that's the place that I go personally to go watch my news. Even the local stations, the reporters, they're great in being involved within the community and informing us of what's happening. So I was just overall happy with what they transmitted. Oh, one more thing. As soon as the hearing was over, they published an article within their website of a summary, and it was all data. It was all facts. So that was great to go back and review.
Perfect. Thank you, Diana. I want to circle back on some of the statements that we've made about Officer Edwards' statements, particularly the one where she said she looked in their eyes and she paid attention, and they had turned their backs on the cops. And this group, they were flying thin blue line flags. They were saying that they were military, ex-military, that they are defenders of America. And at some point they decided that the people protecting the Capitol were no longer the cops that were on their side. They were the cops that were the enemy. Did any of your news medias touch upon this, or can you, from any of your experiences, what does this sound like? Because it sounds like, to me, very hypocritical from a group that usually is Blue Lives Matters and situations like that, to then turn around and knock her unconscious with a barricade.
Yeah, I'll just be really quick. In regards, so my background, obviously military police. I was an anti-terrorism specialist, so I did convoy transport and stuff like that. So I mean, this falls within, you know, my bloodline of understanding with, you know, military law and those type of things. You hit it right on the point there, ma'am. I mean, it's a huge contradiction. I mean, if you're going to stand there and talk about Blue Lives Matter, and you're going to, you know, I mean, let's just even peel that onion back even further. I mean, if you're about America, period, I mean, here you are breaking down and vandalizing the Capitol, you know, so let's talk that one out too as well. So again, there's a lot of contradictions here, you know, waving the American flag, you know, there's just, and destroying, you know, property, and, you know, just carrying on a bunch of thugs and hooligans that have no regard for life, you know, property, or, you know, this country. So it's just a complete disrespect all the way around.
If I can piggyback on that a little bit, it was definitely hypocrisy at the absolute worst, but it also highlight for me how you get to the place where your allegiance to a person propelled you to do that. That's the part that I found shocking. I like a lot of people. I like my husband. I love my husband.
Good. Good news, everybody.
I love my husband. I like him too. He's a good guy. I like the former president, Barack Obama. I like the current president, Joe Biden. I like a lot of people. I can't imagine liking someone or enough to turn against my country like that. That's the part that I find the most chilling. What gets you there? Because yeah, what gets you there? When you study history and you study how democracies have fallen over the centuries and how people got there, this was chilling. And what got into the minds, the heart and minds of people to turn their back on people they would normally support, like law enforcement. They were beating law enforcement with the American flag. I mean, just think about that for a moment. You're beating law enforcement with an American flag, and then say you support law enforcement. You don't. So for me, that's the part that's the most shocking and scary, that you get to that place that you care more about a person than you do your country. That's really what it came down to.
Yeah, and I think it was Liz Cheney this week that said parts of the Republican Party have now turned into a cult of personality around Donald Trump. So
right,
there's to what you've been saying.
You know, I wanted to add on that, you know, and I'm going to go back to it. You know, it's the hatred, you know, that Mr. Trump had kind of accumulated throughout his whole journey of presidency. And we all know, when we talked about it a little bit earlier about the civil rights movement, how much hatred was enthralled into white supremacy. So, I mean, let's have that question, whether or not if it's gone or if it's still here. Apparently, the mindsets and the hatred are still there, because if we go back to the civil rights movement, and Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, a lot of those individuals had disregard for law enforcement back then too, because law enforcement did try to interject in certain situations, and the police at sometimes were even attacked at that moment by these white supremacists and individuals that were formulating around the KKK. So don't disclude where they could have probably, you know, cultivated this mindset. That mindset's always been there. It just took a certain individual to speak into those minds and say, you know, certain terminology. And I'm just going to kind of hit on this too. The Make America Great Again slogan was something that was utilized in propaganda back during the KKK, when they was very heavy too. They were using like those banners and whatnot to do their marches through certain towns. So just keep those things around that. Again, it's easy for me to come from that area of scope because that's my huge interest at this point. So don't leave those rocks unturned when looking at all this, please.
Yeah, just one quick thing. I noticed, and I hadn't heard it quite this way, but during one of Trump's speeches, he said, if Mike Pence does the right thing, then quote, we become president. And I just found that use of we to be really interesting in terms of what you're just describing now. They become part of something. We're all going to be ruling together, which of course is not going to be happening, but it's those kinds of subtle things that draw people in. I think it's really quite fascinating. I hadn't noticed that he said we during that speech.
Thank you, Michael. I think that brings me up to one of the last things I want to talk about before we bring it to anyone who has any questions for us. During the hearing, they played video that was being used for a documentary by Mr. Nick Quested. So the footage that we saw was actually obtained from Nick Quested in his attempt to make a documentary. A lot of it, the documentary has not been released, and a lot of the footage has been obtained by the government. And that is something that cannot, I feel, cannot be changed. They are showing video of exactly what happened. It wasn't like someone's words. This was exactly what happened from someone's camera. So I want to know if in any of your news medias, they made any commentary to bias it more than what was actually shown, because what you're saying, Michael, that Donald Trump used the term we. When we saw those videos, they were saying, this is our house now, or we belong here. We are here now. We're in charge. Those were words that repeated multiple times in those scenes in different clips of the video. So where you're saying that we was surprising, I feel like it was not surprising to them. I feel like at that point, when they already entered the Capitol in those videos, before they entered the Capitol, they viewed themselves as we. If anyone has any comments on any of the other parts of the videos that we saw, or how it was interpreted in your news station, please, the floor is yours.
I will say in regards to Michael, if that's all right, real quick, just I think that goes back into Officer Edwards' testimony. From what I gathered, when she mentioned that, it was a big group and they just all seemed together, right? They didn't seem specifically organized as a group, as one whole group, but it was a bunch of people together as one group. So that just kind of clicked for me when he mentioned we.
They were organized.
Testimony. Yeah.
It was an army.
Testimony.
Yeah, the thing that was just weird to me was that he said, we become president, like we become this office together. That was the only weird part about it for me. The whole group dynamic I understood, but yeah, you make a very, very good points there. To answer your question about a sort of bias, there's a lot of new footage that I hadn't seen. There was obviously some things that hadn't been shown before that they announced, but like the weapons caches and so forth. But to answer your question, they just basically said, oh, there's nothing new to see here. That was Martha McCallum's take consistently was, I see nothing new here at all. We've seen all this. This is old news. Maybe they're going to come up with something later, but this is we've already seen this. There's nothing to see here. It was a pretty consistent message explicitly.
So Chris Wallace is on CNN now. He used to be on Fox News. And so I thought it was one of the things that he said, they had him before and after the hearing. And before the hearing, he was acting the whole Fox News routine of, I'm skeptical and, I don't really know how, I don't know if I'm going to buy this is more or less what he was saying before. And then let's see, then after he sounded a lot more like the CNN people. he was riveted by the videos, and was sold by what he had seen in the videos that night.
For me, so I've watched all of these. I watched the impeachment hearings. I watched the first hearing on January 6th. And I have the same feeling after each one. Because like you, Emily, I watched them as they breached the Capitol, but I also, because I kind of prolific on Twitter, I saw the tweet. I saw former President Donald Trump's tweet to come to the Capitol on January 6th is going to be wild. I saw it when he did that, and I even retweeted it. Or no, I don't think I retweeted it. I think I just took a screenshot of it and said, FBI, I think I tweeted at the FBI, you do see this, right? Because for me, it wasn't a surprise of what happened per se. It's like, of course that was going to happen, but the fact that it happened that way without intervention, in a sense that there was no preparedness, that was the shocking part for me. And watching it unfold, I mean, I watched 9/11 as it happened when the plane hit the tower. I was living in Indiana at the time, and I know exactly where I was when that plane hit the tower. I remember it. I know where I was when the Capitol was breached. I mean, these are pivotal moments that we will be talking about for the rest of our lives, and our grandchildren will be reading about in the history books, and our grandchildren's children will be reading about and learning about in history books, because we are living this history. And this is, for our country at least, what we do now matters. It matters for the future of the country. It matters in us deciding who we are as a country and how we live up to, and if we live up to the ideals of what this country was founded under. So it matters where we go from here and how we receive this information and what we do with it. And that's the thing about knowledge, because once you know, you have to do something with it. If you don't know, then you can claim ignorance and you don't have to do anything because you're ignorant, you didn't know. But once you know, you have to do something with that information. Inaction is action. It is. And that's what we are up against right now. And we have elected officials who have taken an oath of office. And that oath of office is to protect the Constitution. That's the oath of office, not a person, the Constitution. And we have many members of Congress, and I'm going to say Congress because this was Congress, and that's the Senate and the House, who failed in that obligation. So this is where we are right now as a country, what we do with the knowledge that we are receiving based on these hearings, because we're going to have to do something. And inaction is action.
Thank you for those words, Darlene. I think we should go around the panelists for last closing statements. We will then open it up for any questions that you have for our panelists. If you have any questions now, please type them into the chat and I will ask them. Perfect. So we will start with Diana. If you have any closing thoughts about the hearing or the news media in which you watched it.
I think my final thoughts, just to bring to you, is that what I was presented wasn't twisted. There was nothing manipulated with the news media that I watched. It was just all cut and clear. And that was my experience. And the truth is going to be difficult for some folks to accept, but we did go through something so terrifying Like, this is really, really scary. And some of the folks that don't believe it, they're so focused on other things that are happening that they don't see that what was committed in January 6th was treason. It was like they were taking over all like the freedoms that we have today. So I'm looking forward, like I said, on the next hearings and to listen to the other panelists. And thank you for sharing your thoughts tonight.
Thank you. Michael?
I just think I'd like to say that the most emotionally impactful portion of that was just Trump's disregard for Mike Pence's life when he just said, well, he deserves it to be essentially executed. I thought back, and the reason I mentioned my experience in corporate America is it's a lot of cutthroat things that happen, but this is literally cutthroat kind of business. And that really, I think, was the most chilling part for me, because I imagine at that level, people cooperating, working toward a common goal, and for him just cut someone loose like that and just value a life so little, that for me is beyond all the other sort of intellectual issues and logical issues around different beliefs of things. I can't understand why someone would follow someone who would so willingly just say, you can die. You're my right-hand man and you can die. That was shocking to me. And I'd never really thought of it that way until, hearing him actually, or hearing people say he said that. I'd heard that there were rumors about that, but for people to say under oath, yes, he said that literally, was quite shocking to me. I think it's very easy to see how Fox is going to spin this from what they did, and I'll have Darlene post some notes on that, some other things, but it's going to be very straightforward, I think, attack on the whole process. But thank you so much for moderating this as well. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Michael. We'll go Ryan, Emily, and followed by Kenny.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone else, and panelists for contributing. I appreciate hearing your insights as well. Just to circle it back around to the news and MSNBC, since that was my assigned station, I thought they did a good job reporting. I don't think they twisted it. I think they dressed it up a little bit? That all depends on the recipient. I believe they use terminology to keep you not entertained, but engaged. At the same time, if the recipient doesn't feel that a national security issue and is something that's important, that is something that needs to be highlighted and discussed and dressed up and make people engaged to know about, I think that is a problem. I think allowing domestic terrorists to go ahead and do this type of thing freely and unchecked is a disaster, is a recipe for repeat. So I think they did a good job. I think as an overview of the news, did a fairly good job of letting it play itself out. Again, I think they did things to keep people engaged so they didn't fall asleep or whatever, just because, people have short attention spans. Some people can't handle it. It just kind of varies. So again, thanks for having me. I think it's important to get a different view of each and to see what's being put in front of us. So thank you for doing this.
Okay. There's something on the tip of my tongue that I can't remember, but I did want to say something more about Woodward and Bernstein. Back during Watergate, the Republicans turned against the President Nixon, and that's not happening here. That's obviously, I'm obviously speaking something really obvious here, but because of that, we don't know where this is going. I can only imagine what must have been like back in the Watergate era. It was probably somewhat similar to this, but we're here now. Oh, I remember. So I believe it was Eastman and Trump, so there was some kind of statement about if they had been able to carry out what they did, that would have been the end. You know, there would have been no more peaceful transfer of power in this country. So the scary thing is these guys are taking notes, and it's just a matter of time before all of this happens again, unless this hearing can, oh, really? Interesting, Ryan. You know, this could all happen again, and I fear that it will. Yeah.
We'll follow up those remarks with Kenny, and Darlene will be our closing panelist statement.
Yeah, again, thank you, Darlene, for having us. And of course, you know, the respected panelists that are here as well this evening and gave some strong input. Again, leaning from my neck of the woods in my corner in response to this, I don't feel where I had watched the information on PBS, I don't feel like it was biased in a sense that it was persuasive against some of my viewpoints and the things that I had thought. So I feel like I had an unblocked or clear view of exactly what was happening and what was being presented. So I could appreciate that on that level. Other than that, piggybacking on what Darlene said earlier, this is America, along with Michael too. This is a place where we are supposed to be united, and we are too divided. And we need to come to some commonality here to understand that we are all here together to do this as one. And we just have to find a place to, you know, get some ground to do this together. But thank you for having me.
I want to take this moment to thank all of our wonderful panelists for agreeing to share this night with us. But it looks like there may be a question in the chat there, if we can come back to it. But I thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Ryan, Emily, Deanna, and thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Michael, for giving us this time, for giving us your evening. And thank you to everyone who decided to join us for this discussion as well. And for me, like I said, this was a different way. I did just a straight stream from the Congressional House panel, congressional hearing. And there was no commentary at all, which is usually very different for me. I usually watch either MSNBC or CNN for these types of events. But I think the reason why I wanted to do this is because what divides us, and usually what divides us, is how we get our media. We have a problem of disinformation and misinformation in our media right now, and how people consume news is what keeping us divided, because it's kind of like the tale of two Americas. And if you believe that January 6th didn't happen and your news media is telling you that it didn't happen, and you turned on your news media that you normally watch tonight, and there was nothing there related to January 6th, you will probably still believe that nothing happened on January 6th. So it's concerning that Fox News itself did not air it, but I'm glad that Fox Business did. And I hope that the viewers who would normally watch Fox News will take the time to seek out other information. I do remember there was a press conference that the former president had given, telling them not to consume other media, that only they are the ones that tell them the truth. And this is a problem. This is a problem, because you can't look at this with an unbiased eye if you're not going to believe it. That's one thing that I want to say. But with that being said, there are, I believe, 4 more hearings. There's 1 more prime time and 3 that are during the day. I will be watching those as well. I hope that others will watch them as well, because there's a lot more there. We have to be diligent with our democracy. If we care about the future of the country and we want to protect our country, we have to know about what happened on January 6th and how close we came to losing it. We came very, very close, very, very close. And I believe what the hearings will show is how close that we were to losing it. And that's frightening for me. I hope that it's frightening for many other people as well. I would normally make jokes. I'm a pretty lighthearted person. I like to laugh. I love to laugh. But this is not something to laugh about. This is very, very serious, and we have to take it that way. So I'm going to encourage everyone to continue to watch the hearings. I'm going to encourage everyone to seek out new media. If you don't believe that the one that you're telling you is giving it to you straight, watch these hearings directly from the committee hearing. Stream it without any commentary at all, so that you can get straight news and then form your own opinion based on what you see. And if you still have questions, I know I will be here, and many of the panelists will be here as well. And I'm sure you may already know them from social media spaces. I'm sure they'll be able to answer any questions that you may have respectfully. Just seek those answers, and let's find a way to come together as one, because in the end, we are united, we stand, or divided, we fall. And I would like to remain the United States of America. And on that note, I'm going to yield the floor to Michele. I believe there were people who did post something in the chat.
We have one question from Carl. You raised question of how to reach out to others who see this evidence and still deny it. I have actually just slowly walked away from those who I considered close friends, and it's hard. And I honestly don't believe we can reach them. What would you suggest? Does anyone have any comments on that one?
I'm gonna leave that one to Michael. He was the one that made a comment on that one.
I talk about this a lot with friends. It is difficult, but I think that if you sit down with someone and most people just want to be heard. And if you, with real sincerity, talk to someone and ask them their opinion and they give it to you, and you can, without judgment, listen to that and start to talk through calmly. Once they've been heard, they're willing to listen more. So I think that if you want to reach out to someone, the first thing you have to do is listen to them. I think that's the important first step. And I also find that just as human beings, if we sit down to have dinner or something like that, whatever format you want to have that in, it's really hard to break bread with someone and hate them. So I think that combination is a good start. And if you get that far and you're able to have a civil conversation with someone, then reach out to me and I'll give you the next one. I think Catherine also had a thing she wanted to be unmuted to ask.
I think we're not unmuting.
Oh,
Is
okay.
that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
I've been on these types of calls and they have been Zoom bombed, and so we had put the security measures in place to not allow that.
Sure. I will summarize what Catherine is stating. It takes a very mature person to understand loyalty to our country and our Constitution. They're very big ideas. Most folks nowadays have terrible civics education. And I believe KSL wrote an article this week about how Utah has particularly bad education of civics and basically how the government works. Then she goes on to say, Trump has displayed no understanding of the Constitution, nor of his oath. I am very concerned that folks who will not have their minds changed cannot cope with larger values of our democracy and our precious constitution. Darlene, your ideas of speaking as if folks are sixth graders, your panel folks are great ideas to have all kinds of news sources. I don't know if anyone read that KSL article that said that Utahns really struggle with civic engagement and civics in general, but I think this is a very apropos comment. It's something that we are very much aware of. I particularly have been working on some of the Senate races that are happening in this state, and even things like a primary versus a general election are things that people struggle the concepts to understand. What can we do, or how can we impact our communities or our environments for them to maybe have a better understanding or a better grasp of how the Constitution and our loyalties should interact in correlation with civics? I think that's the question we're getting at here.
I think if you don't mind, a relatable conversation always starts, of course, relating at that point. Michael brought up a good point about that. Breaking bread or getting ground. You have to have at least a minimum knowledge of that individual that you're speaking with, and to at least try to interject something that they can empathize with. And if you can, the two of you can, move forward on that empathy, then the foot is kind of in the door at that point. You just kind of inch your way through it. I mean, I know for the work that I do, being, an anti-racist and going against the grind here in this state, it's extremely hard for me to get my voice out there, but that's a strong step that I take. I give people a little bit, I help them understand a small take on it, and we move forward.
I'm going to make the last statement to be respectful of people's time and let them get off of this Zoom so they can enjoy the rest of the evening. Civic education. So I started One Utah Project in 2020 for that purpose, because I recognize as well that the best form of voter suppression is to make people believe that their vote doesn't count and that it doesn't matter. That is the absolute best form of voter suppression, because people, unfortunately, really believe that. So the United States have one of the worst voting records in the industrialized world. We don't vote, and it is intentional. When you study history, and especially when you study the beginning of the conservative movement in this country, William F. Buckley, who is the father of the conservative movement, did not believe in universal voting. He did not believe in universal suffrage. This point is lost. This is lost on a lot of people. When he made the statement, and I know I'm about to go over a whole bunch of people's heads right now, but bear with me, please, bear with me. The James Baldwin, William Buckley debate that happened on February 18th, 1965 in Cambridge, England, Cambridge, not Massachusetts, in Cambridge. He made a statement that people laughed at. They laughed at him because they thought he was making a joke. He was not making a joke. The question was, there wasn't a question, it was a statement to William F. Buckley to let the people in Mississippi vote. If you watch that debate, if you ever watch that debate, listen for that. Someone said to William F. Buckley, let the people in Mississippi vote. And the way William F. Buckley responded was, he didn't believe that it was a problem about not letting the Negro vote, but there were too many white people voting. And the audience laughed. They laughed, but William F. Buckley actually believed that. He did not believe in universal suffrage. And the best way to keep people from voting is to not give them civic education, to not allow them to understand the power and the importance of the vote. We don't teach it in our schools, or just barely teach it in our schools. And we don't teach it to our young adults. And then you have voter apathy where people just check out. People don't actually listen to what I have to say anyway, so I'm just going to check out. All of these are kind of by design to maintain a status quo and to maintain a power structure that actually takes away freedoms and liberties and rights. And we see this happening right now with gerrymandered districts, that politicians are picking their voters instead of voters picking the politician. And people are not being adequately represented not even based on where they live, because the districts have been literally chiseled out and just cut out. And you can see that right here in Utah. So it's by design. But the best way to really get your power back, the best way to get your voice back is to vote. And make that your number one issue. If my number one issue is, I at least want a voice. And if there's a political party that believes in voting rights and not on a lie that millions of illegal votes were cast, which cannot happen, then vote for that. Vote that way. Vote that way. Let your voice be your voice. Let your vote be your voice. And I want to end with thank you very much, everyone, for coming, for joining us, for being here, for sticking it out with us. You all have been absolutely amazing. I applaud you. Thank you so very much. And hopefully we can do this again, but go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.